Hi, this is Len Furman bringing you another episode of the Sports Time Traveler. Today I have a very entertaining story. It's titled 1903 Final Game of the Greatest Gridiron Team. A football tournament held indoors in Madison Square Garden determined the pro football champion of 1903. I start with an introduction from the Sports Time Traveler. I'm a little late getting this article out to you as I had a busy weekend of sports time traveling. First, the sports time travel machine took me back to December 15th, 1963 to see the Giants and the Steelers battle for the NFL's Eastern Division crown. I received great feedback on that story, and you can access it at the link I have in the written version of this article. The story is titled The Oddity and the Ecstasy. Then I immediately jumped into the time machine again and dialed it ahead 10 years to December 15th, 1973 to see UCLA take on NC State in the National Championship of College Basketball. It was a game between two undefeated teams that should have met 9 months earlier in the NCAA Final. Many readers told me they really enjoyed this article as well, and you can find it also at the link I have in the written version of the article. Then, without a break, I took off farther back in time than I've been since I started the Sports Time Traveler last year. I went all the way back to New York City on December 17th, 1903. I was encouraged to make this trip by football historian Darren Hayes, who is the host of the Pigskin Dispatch podcast. Darren informed me about a football team of all-stars that had been assembled in 1903 to play for a small oil town in western Pennsylvania called Franklin. Darren's even written a book about the Franklin All-Stars, which I highly recommend. The book is titled The World's Greatest Pro Gridiron Team, the 1903 Franklin All-Stars. Wealthy oil barons in Franklin didn't like losing to nearby Oil City's football team in 1902 and were determined to build an unbeatable team for the 1903 season. Bringing in players from around the country, they put together a formidable squad. These Franklin All-Stars had a remarkable run through their season. They were so dominant that Oil City didn't even field a team to play against them. Here were the scores of all of Franklin's regular season games. October 21, Franklin 74, Youngstown nothing. October 24, Franklin 28, Primrose nothing. October 28, Franklin 46, Jamestown nothing. October 31, Franklin 56, Wheeling nothing. November 7th, Franklin 33, Elwood nothing. November 11th, Franklin 74, Niagara zip. November 14th, Franklin 45, Sewickley 0. November 18, Franklin 12, Syracuse nothing. November 21st, Franklin 47, Allegheny College nothing. And November 26th, Franklin 23, East End nothing. Notice that Franklin not only won every game in the regular season, but they were unscored upon through the entire season. Following the November 26 game, the all-star players began to leave Western Pennsylvania and return home. But in short order, they were contacted to return. Franklin had been invited to play in a football tournament to take place in Madison Square Garden in mid-December as one of 4 teams vying for the championship of the world. Not every Franklin player was available for the tournament. In fact, player coach Tech Matthews was already in Texas, where he was reportedly ill. In his place, Franklin recruited Doc Roller, a standout player of that time who had played in the 1902 version of the tournament. And Blondie Wallace, another player on the Franklin team, took over as player coach. In the tournament semifinal game, Franklin played the Orange Athletic Club of New Jersey on December 15th, 1903. Franklin won that game 12-0 to preserve their undefeated, unscored upon record. Now Franklin was set to play Watertown, a team that was so determined to be crowned champions of the world that their owner had organized and funded the entire tournament. Naturally, there was no other place I wanted to be on December 17th, 1903, than Madison Square Garden. Here's my story of the championship game. 1903, final game of the greatest gridiron team, Madison Square Garden, New York, December 18, 1903. I'm here in New York City, precisely 120 years ago, where last night, inside Madison Square Garden, was the football championship of the world, or so the promoters fashioned it to be. The combatants were the football teams from Franklin and Watertown. I have to start out by telling you that football in 1903 was barely recognizable to me. Punting on first downs was a common strategy when you were deep in your own territory. The forward pass had not yet been invented. On goal line stands, it was perfectly acceptable for the linemen to hoist the man with the ball up and over the opposing line for a touchdown. And touchdowns were only worth 5 points. Also in 1903, pro football was not the rage it is now. In fact, Ivy League college football was at the zenith of all sports in America. I found that out when I saw a film of the Princeton-Yale football game that had been played a month earlier. Note from the Sports Time Traveler. I interrupt this article to inform you that the video below, and the written version of the article, I have the video, is actually believed to be the first ever film of a football game. It was taken at Yale Field on November 14th, 1903 by Thomas Edison. An estimated 50,000 fans were in attendance there to see Princeton beat Yale 11-6. Now back to 1903. One more thing that stunned me about football in 1903 was that in the professional game, betting was taking place all around, out in the open, even among the players. And of course, there was nothing quite as interesting as experiencing a football game played inside in an arena. Old Madison Square Garden was not large enough to have a full-sized field, and of course did not have a playing surface for football. As a result, hundreds of truckloads of dirt were brought in and spread across the garden floor, and an 80-yard field was created for the football tournament games. The Franklin All-Stars have not let up a single point all season. The most intriguing thing about the championship game to me was that Franklin had not allowed a single point to be scored against them all season. Not only was a championship on the line, but also the chance at a perfect season. The championship game. The game started at about 10:30 p.m. and consisted of two 25-minute halves. 2,500 fans were in the stands. Watertown received the opening kickoff. On their first possession, they fumbled, and Franklin took the ball at the Watertown 15. Franklin couldn't move the ball very far, and Watertown took possession on downs, deep in their own territory. Watertown then chose to punt the ball rather than risk fumbling near their own goal line. Franklin's Kirchhoff rushed to the Watertown 15-yard line. It was one of many runs by the big man. The New York Times wrote about him the next day, quote, Kirchhoff, who is a giant in stature, hurdled over the heads of the players several times. Next, it was Doc Roller driving the ball down to the Watertown 5. Finally, Bull Davidson of Franklin rushed the final 5 yards for a touchdown. Davidson also kicked the extra point, and Franklin took a 6-0 lead. After Watertown got the ball back, they turned it over on downs at midfield. Franklin was then penalized 20 yards for holding, so that they took possession on their own 20-yard line. Franklin then drove into Watertown territory. Doc Roller attempted a free kick and had it blocked. The momentum then turned, and Watertown began driving the ball with what the New York Sun called, quote, a fast, aggressive attack. Franklin aided their opponent by drawing 2 penalties, one for 5 yards and then another for 10 yards. Then runs by Watertown's Draper, Botker, Cruz, and Mann moved the ball all the way to the Franklin 25. At this point, Draper of Watertown attempted a drop kick and missed. Franklin fans could breathe a sigh of relief. The unscored upon season was still alive after the missed kick. As the first half came to a close, there was another big scare for Franklin, as reported by the New York Tribune. Quote, just as the whistle blew to end the half, the Watertown men freed the ball on their opponent's 3-yard line. Franklin had been saved by the whistle from a possible Watertown score. Franklin 6, Watertown nothing, halftime. There was some comic relief during the game, which was reported to be fiercely fought with many injuries on the field. Read this excerpt from the New York Tribune about the lighter side of the contest. And in the written version of the article, I have this excerpt. The largest crowd since the tournament opened saw the game. The band had a little fun with the players, and when one of them would be knocked out, it would play Please Go Away and Let Me Sleep. Please Go Away and Let Me Sleep was a popular song written the year before in 1902, and in the written version of the article I have a link so you can actually listen to the song. In the second half, Franklin came out playing aggressive and had, quote, the ball in their rivals' territory most of the time, according to the New York Tribune. On the third possession of the second half, Franklin drove down to the Watertown 8, but Watertown held Franklin there and took the ball on downs. Watertown promptly fumbled, and Franklin recovered on the Watertown 2. On the second play, the giant Kirchhoff scored a touchdown for Franklin. Bull Davidson had left the game injured, so Hayden kicked the extra point for Franklin. Franklin was now ahead 12-0 with 15 minutes to play in the game. Late in the game, Franklin was driving again and got the ball down to the Watertown 3-yard line when time ran out at just about midnight. The game was over. Franklin had won the championship 12-0. Special note from the Sports Time Traveler. As you probably have guessed, the Sports Time Traveler doesn't actually go back in time. I simulate time travel by systematically reading the newspaper archives each day. I'm usually focused on following the sports each day precisely 50 and 60 years ago. To prepare for the 1903 football championship, I started my trip in early December and read the newspapers each day from exactly 120 years ago. When it came to the December 18th, 1903 newspapers that had the accounts of the championship game from the day before, I read at least 10 different stories on the game. The startling thing was that unlike reading sports from 1963 or 1973, every account of the key events of this game in 1903 were a bit different. Each reporter agreed on a few facts: that Franklin kicked off to Watertown to start the game, that Davidson and Kirchhoff scored the 2 touchdowns, and that the final score was 12-0. Much of what happened in between was not the same across the various newspaper stories. As a result, I have tried to piece together a version of the game that might have actually happened. Now, once again, let's go back to 1903. Undefeated and unscored upon. By winning the championship game 12-0, Franklin had completed the undefeated, unscored upon season. Across the 12 games Franklin played in 1903, they had outscored their opponents by a total score of 468-0. It is perhaps the greatest season in the history of pro football. The December 18, 1903 Meadville, Pennsylvania Evening Republican framed the accomplishment best in this excerpt. The Stars have not been defeated this season. Neither has any team scored against them. The successively deflated Syracuse, the East End Athletes, Niagara Falls, and all 11s brought against them. By winning from Orange and Watertown without their goal line being crossed a single time, they have established an unparalleled record. Franklin enthusiasts were wild last night. In the Postal Telegraph offices where the reports of the game were received, more than 1,000 people were congregated. And this is not even in Franklin. This is in nearby Meadville. The Franklin Evening News, the newspaper from Franklin, celebrated their team with a large story that appeared on the first page in the left couple of columns of the December 18th, 1903 paper. Included in that article was this paragraph. Franklin played 12 games, scoring 461 points, an average of 38 to a game. The team holds a record that is almost unprecedented, having never been scored against. It was, without a doubt, the most remarkable and strongest aggregation of players ever. Betting on the game. Along with all the other oddities of an indoor football game in 1903, I was stunned to learn that there was heavy betting on the championship game. This betting was widely known about, and even the players in the game took part and bet large sums. Read this account in the December 18, 1903 New York Sun. The betting was even money on the Watertown-Franklin game, about $1,500 being bet by the players. And here's an account from the Meadville Evening Republican. By winning this championship, the team secures a cash prize of $1,250. Now that money was actually from the promoters. But then listen to this line. Speculation was lively and the Franklin rooters came out with a nice roll to the good. So more evidence of significant betting on the game. Bonus material. A great book on the 1903 Franklin All-Stars. For a much more detailed and very entertaining account of the 1903 Franklin All-Stars undefeated and unscored upon season, I highly recommend a new book that just came out by Darren Hayes. The book is titled The World's Greatest Pro Gridiron Team, the 1903 Franklin All-Stars. And I have a link in the written version of this article where you can learn more about the book. You can also find the book very easily on Amazon. Just simply go to Amazon and search on 1903 Franklin All-Stars. The Wright brothers. The morning after the championship football game, I realized that the date of the game, December 17, 1903, was a truly historic date. It marked the first airplane flight by the Wright brothers in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. I went looking through the newspapers in New York City, but the New York Times, the Sun, and the New York Tribune all did not have a story about the Wright brothers. Then I got a copy of the Brooklyn Citizen newspaper, and there it was on page 1. And in the written version of the article, I have the clipping from the Brooklyn Citizen. The title is Bird Ships Fine Flight, New Machines 3 miles soar over sand dunes. And then the article begins, the problem of aerial flight without the use of a balloon has been solved by Wilbur and Orville Wright of Dayton, Ohio, who yesterday at Kitty Hawk on the coast of North Carolina successfully navigated a flying machine of their own invention for 3 miles. Needless to say, I was very excited to unexpectedly get to read a first-hand account of that famous flight by the Wright brothers on my trip to experience the Franklin All-Stars Championship. Well, that's all for today. Thanks so much for listening. Bye-bye now.